I think it's obvious that not every car is successful in terms of sales. There could be many reasons for this, such as, say, the amount of advertising a model got, or because a car simply doesn't live up to the company or their customers' expectations. With that said, today we're going to be looking at the biggest flops in the automotive industry. But before we start, we have to define what a commercial flop is. First of all, we have to account for the sales numbers of a specific model. If it's too low, then yeah, it's a commercial failure, or a flop. And so, with that cleared up, this is Autofill, and I hope you enjoyed this video. To start, why don't we talk about one of the strangest cars of the 2000s. You see, in the late 90s, then chairman of the Volkswagen Group, Ferdinand Piëch, was looking to expand VW's lineup. In doing this, he conceived a luxury executive sedan that he hoped would beat the likes of Mercedes-Benz and BMW, two of the biggest prestige market leaders in Europe at the time, especially after both companies introduced their own inexpensive models to directly rival Volkswagen, those being the A-Class and 3 Series Compact respectively. Mr. Piëch's decision came as a strange one, mainly because the Volkswagen Group already had its own rival to BMW and Mercedes in Audi, which offered the Audi A8, a good enough rival by all means. What Mr. Piëch really wanted, though, was more of a comfort-oriented sedan, like the Lexus LS for example. He ended up coming up with a liftback concept car called the Concept D as a predecessor for what's to come. The Concept D had a rather strange V10 turbo diesel engine, as well as all-wheel drive and air suspension. This concept ended up being quite well received, and so Ferdinand Piëch continued with this project, eventually introducing the all-new Phaeton sedan to the Volkswagen range in 2002. This bulky executive limousine aimed to truly define comfort and luxury, and you can definitely tell that it wanted to do that. Just look at the interior. Anyway, the VW Phaeton was built on the same platform as the Bentley Continental GT and Flying Spur, which means that the Phaeton also shares their engines, and so Volkswagen's new top-shelf model had a lot of engines to choose from a 3.2 litre VR6 all the way up to the almighty 6-litre W12 also used by the aforementioned Bentleys, as well as the Audi A8, another close relative of the Phaeton. With all that said, the Phaeton was definitely the perfect luxury limousine, but not everyone thought that it actually was perfect. This luxury sedan didn't really sell well, especially in America, where it was only sold for 2 years as a result. The main thing that scared away potential buyers was, surprisingly enough, the badge. The word Volkswagen literally means people's car in German, and the Phaeton certainly wasn't a people's car. Another reason for the model's failure is the fact that the Phaeton was built using expensive and hard to obtain Bentley parts, meaning that keeping a Phaeton in a good drivable state isn't very cheap. Despite all that, it still managed to hold on to a place in VW's range for a good 15 years or so, meaning that while the Phaeton wasn't the most successful car ever, VW's management must have had a soft spot for this model. And I mean, who doesn't? After all, this is probably one of Volkswagen's weirdest cars ever. Why don't we move on to another car made by the Germans, albeit under a different brand that has its roots in the United Kingdom. You'll probably think that I'm talking about Mini, and if so, then you're right. Basically, starting in the late 2000s, the Mini brand's owner, BMW, was hoping to expand the British marque's range, initially introducing the Countryman, Mini's first SUV. The original Countryman would end up being a success, and it still lives on today. But BMW's executives must have thought it wasn't enough, as in 2012, 2 years after the Countryman's introduction, a new model debuted that was meant to fill the gap between the mini hatch, its derivatives, and the larger Countryman. That model was the Paceman, an odd-looking crossover with just 3 doors, something that is rarely seen today in the 21st century. It was meant to be a sporty alternative to the family-oriented Countryman, and was even marketed as a sports activity coupe, whatever that's supposed to mean. And so you'd probably think that it's a somewhat fast car, and there was one sort of fast version, that being the John Cooper Works variant, with a 1.6 litre turbocharged engine putting out 215 horsepower. It had a top speed of 140 miles per hour and went from 0 to 60 in about 7 seconds, all of these not being bad stats for an SUV. However, the Paceman's sportiness didn't really mean that it would sell well. It's theorized that just 30,000 Pacemans were sold in Europe during the model's 4-year lifespan, which you can probably tell is certainly not a lot. That, combined with the Paceman's strange styling and being in a rather niche segment, meant that this coupe crossover was quite the flop. Therefore, you'd expect BMWs to stray away from this market segment with Mini after the Paceman's failure, but no. About 2 years ago, BMW revealed the very similarly named Mini Aceman, that basically functions as a spiritual successor to the Paceman, even though it has 5 doors and is nearly identical to the new Countryman. Oh well, at least it's not marketed as a sports activity coupe anymore, am I right? Maybe the Aceman won't sell as bad as the Paceman, we'll just have to wait and see. Now here's an interesting car. If you're familiar with Aston Martin, then you'll know that in the 90s, the company's flagship model was a V8 powered coupe called the Virage. Built completely by hand, it was the most luxurious Aston offered at the time, even having a fancy Volante convertible version. All this made the Virage a rather likeable model in Aston Martin's range, even though it did suffer from high maintenance costs and somewhat dated engineering. Those flaws didn't tarnish the Virage's reputation whatsoever, and so Aston Martin knew that people would be happy to see the model's nameplate be brought back after its discontinuation in 2000. The nameplate would return 11 years later in 2011, when it was used on a Grand Tourer meant to fill the tiny gap between the DB9 and more aggressive DBS. The new Virage was meant to be both sporty and luxurious, and while it did end up being both of those, the 2011 Virage was simply too similar to the DB9 it was based on to be a success, and therefore Aston Martin suffered quite a commercial failure. Like seriously, just look at the DB9 and Virage side by side. Can you tell the difference? I can't, so you probably can't tell either. And so Aston Martin only sold the new Virage for about a year and a half, selling less than 1,000 units. This should teach car companies a lesson. Never sell models that are too similar to other ones, as that will most likely result in a catastrophic failure. Now for our last car, I thought we could talk about a small car that was mainly sold in the United States. Basically, in 1993, Ford was still partnered with South Korean company Kia, and so the two manufacturers sought to make a new generation of the Ford Festiva, which had been discontinued late in the previous year. The second generation Festiva ended up being introduced to the US and Canada as the Aspire, with an appearance slightly similar to the then sold Fiesta. Since it came with a choice of 2 different straight-4 Mazda engines, the Aspire was very fuel efficient, just like its predecessor. Therefore, you'd think that this economical little hatchback would be a success. But no, it wasn't. Something you may not know is that the Aspire was sold alongside the second generation American Escort, which sat in the same segment, and while it was more expensive, it was more powerful and capable, especially seeing as the Aspire made 64 horsepower, not a lot compared to the 110 horsepower produced by the Escort. The Escort also had a wider range of body styles, which is why customers often chose it over the Aspire. There's also the case of the Dodge Neon, another rival of the Aspire, that you can probably tell outdid it in many ways, such as in power, like the Ford Escort. We can't forget that the Aspire also didn't have the greatest build quality, and despite the hatchback's name, Ford didn't aspire to add basic features like a cassette player or rear wiper as standard. This ultimately resulted in the Ford Aspire being killed off in 1997, after just 4 years of production. Now, I will also quickly mention that Ford actually resurrected the Aspire nameplate in 2015, but only in India. This newer Aspire was simply the sedan version of the India-exclusive Figo hatchback, which itself is just a renamed Ford Car Plus. This Aspire didn't sell well either, funnily enough, for the same reasons as the original Aspire's failure. I guess that the best way to end this part of the video is to say that Ford didn't really aspire to make a good car, if you know what I mean. Thank you all for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel to stay updated on my automotive shenanigans. With all that said, this is Autophil, and I'll see you later.